Hi everyone, Peter Hirschfeld here, Unit Coordinator and ELA for Science and Technology. I'm here to go through our first assignment, so welcome to the unit. First assignment for Science and Technology, which is a report. And it is a 2,000 word report and it is due in week 6. So your job is to imagine you're employed as a teacher in an education setting where management's decided to cut back on the inclusion of science within the curriculum. We're asking you to write a report to management, your management team, so it's a hypothetical management team, that outlines the value and relevance of science education within the early years from birth to 5 years of age. Within this, we're asking you to demonstrate your ability to use research literature and curriculum documents to illustrate how theory and practice is integrated in the curriculum in this hypothetical early learning centre to provide meaningful science learning experiences for the early years. So this report has been designed to provide you with a chance to put theory into practice, so your understanding of science and technology in the early years into practice. The assignment supports the unit learning outcomes 1, 2 and 5, which we'll just have a quick look at. So, summarise the importance of science content, processes and attitudes in teaching young children, describe key science concepts and explain how to promote science conceptual development for children from birth to 5 years of age, and to create opportunities for design, technology and digital technologies to be integrated within science learning experiences. This particular project is more focused on science. So get rid of that. Let's have a look at the assignment details. So there's actually quite a clear structure that we expect you to use, a format that is standard format for an academic report or a report in general in any business or educational setting. So you'll need to include the following headings: an executive summary, a table of contents, an introduction, and within that you introduce a context and outline of the main aspects of your report and a rationale for why you think science is important in the early years of learning. Then, after the introduction, you have your main body, which includes key points. And the key points that we're looking at, and we'll unpack in a few minutes, include a summary of importance of teaching science, content, processes and attitude. Remember those 3 points in that particular dot point: science, content, processes and attitudes, as they will make up a lot of your report, are the basis of why science is important in the early years. You need to include a succinct explanation of the science categories. These categories are taken from the Australian curriculum and are the same in all of the state and territory curriculum documents, whichever you choose to use. So biology, chemical sciences, physical sciences and earth and space sciences. There are 4 main science categories. Within that, you also need to use examples of relevant conceptual understandings which you'll find in the curriculum documents to explain that a little bit further. And so what concepts you're hoping the children, infants, toddlers and early years primary get from those. You also need to include a summary of how teaching approaches are chosen to support the teaching of science concepts for that age group, so age-appropriate activities and approaches that you would use to implement them and develop them. You also need to include a summary of how science is described in the early years learning framework and the Australian curriculum, or the relevant state territory curriculum. And finally, a conclusion. So a conclusion is your brief summary of the key points, which is dot point 4, and also recommendations to the management team about how and why science can be included in the early childhood curriculum. There's quite a bit of support in these links about writing reports and referencing, and you'll find there's an exemplar from last teaching period in the Padlet. The criteria was actually, this is a holistic rubric that we're marking to this time. So it has, whilst the content hasn't actually changed, the way we mark it has changed. So you can have a look at that exemplar that has been included in the Padlet, and we'll see if we can get another couple up for you to have a look at to get some extra ideas of how you might go about writing this. Now, I'm going to have a look at the rubric. Whoops, I made that very big. So I'm going to hopefully click into that and not lose everything. I don't think this is going to make that much difference. Let's have a look down here. I'll make this bigger. Sorry, fiddling around here. That's not going to work. All right, I'll just sort of scan up and down. So, holistic rubric. You need to really pay very close attention to this, because you need to address all of the dot points here to achieve a pass. And if you want a higher mark, and go on and so forth. So in order to pass this assignment, all of the criteria must be met at a satisfactory level, and all work must be original unless correctly cited. These are the dot points that we need to look at for you to achieve a pass, and I'll unpack these a little bit more. Sorry about this. So to pass, you need to clearly address the topic and explore, maybe not in great depth, but you do need to explore it in a minimal way, the importance of teaching science content, processes and attitude within the early years. So this is minimal. You need to include a rudimentary, which means basic, explanation of the 4 science categories: biology, chemistry, earth and space sciences and physical sciences. You'll notice earth and space has an and, but it's actually one science category. And you also need to include some examples of relevant conceptual understandings drawn from these. And when we say relevant, age-appropriate concepts that children might be learning at this age, and from birth to 5 years, and what they might be doing. You need to demonstrate a developing understanding of how teaching approaches are chosen to support the teaching of science concepts appropriate to the specific requirements of that age group, and also draw on the early years learning framework and Australian curriculum or relevant state curriculums. So you need to make some clear links there. Your structure needs to be in a report format structure, and it needs to be clear and adhere to the required format. There may be some errors in there for a pass, but we expect that you have put in effort and you've attempted to structure it as professionally as you can, including paragraphs and headings. And to pass, you also need to demonstrate a developing ability to use relevant scholarly literature. And this really includes course materials. So you'll find we've got absolutely fantastic readings in our unit. And if you've done any of the other science units, you'll be able to draw on those as well, and any other relevant courses that you've done. And these need to be to support what you're actually writing about and how you're persuading management to keep science in the curriculum. And we expect that you've done your best to attempt to use correct citation when you're referencing other people's work. And so consequently, this increases in level and sophistication as you progress from a pass to a credit to a distinction to a high distinction. So do make sure you read through these and have a good look. Any questions, always ask your ELA, because That's what our job is, and we're very happy to ask questions, and we appreciate the time you've put into thinking about it, so please don't hesitate to ask. So, the difference between a report and an essay. So the purpose of a report is to convey specific information to provide whoever's reading it, the client, with something relevant to them and what they need to know. An essay is more academic. It's more to show how well you've understood the question and able to answer it. So an essay usually has some kind of question that posed that you would respond to. A report is a bit different because it usually contains a description of why you're doing it, but also you draw on research to support what you're doing. You need to do more than just describe the events or the results of what you've found, and you need to analyse them, and that's where your examples would come in to support what you're saying. And at the end of a report, you're really proposing something to management. So, we expect a good conclusion, what you've drawn from this, and some recommendations to management about how they might implement science in the early years in an easy and effective way. So essays do have conclusions, but they don't usually include recommendations. Always use sections with headings. There is a clear structure to this, which I've just shown you. Reports aren't only used by academics, so you almost will surely be asked to write one in the course of your professional life. And a report's more broken up into chunks or sections, so it's a different style of writing. So that's a basic level of that. We'll unpack that a little bit further and think about that in more detail. So now let's just go back to the assignment criteria. I'll just get that back up. So if we're looking at the criteria, focus initially on the first 3 dot points of each pass credit distinction. That's like a sequence, they're all linked. So for instance, in pass, it says address, oh, goodness me, sorry, that's not great. I'll go in through here, assignment criteria. So for pass, it says addresses the topic and explores in a minimal way the importance of teaching science, content, processes and attitudes within the early years. If you look at the credit, it's the same idea, but it's showing a little bit more understanding. So you demonstrate sound knowledge and understanding of the importance of teaching science, content, processes and attitudes within the early years. So there's a flow on there. The first dot point in all of them is about science, content, processes and attitudes. So I would just briefly like to discuss that with you. So really you're doing a summary of the importance of teaching science, content, processes and attitude. You're addressing the topic, which is management wanting to withdraw science from the early years curriculum in a hypothetical learning centre, you could name it if you like. The term content knowledge, it refers to the body of knowledge and the information that teachers teach and that students are expected to learn in any given subject or content area, and in this case it's science. And it's the 4 science categories: biology, chemistry, physics and earth and space sciences. And that's from the Australian curriculum. When we talk about, so that's the science content, that's what they're learning, it's a big umbrella. When you're talking about processing and skills, the way I think of it, the term processes in relation to this assignment are the steps and the strategies that children use in their learning and what they're developing along the way, and they can apply to other areas of life, such as observing, collecting, noticing, questioning, sorting, classifying, analysing their science processes and skills. Attitudes are slightly different. They're more dispositions that we encourage or are developed through rich science activities. And they're things like creative thinking, problem solving, persistence, and wonder, curiosity. So an example. So you'll talk about how, developing science concepts encourages these skills and attitudes. And you will incorporate examples throughout to support what you're talking about, because otherwise it's personal opinion. So you're drawing on academic literature to support it, but also a brief example of an activity of how this might look in an early childhood centre. So they're really the what and how this could be done with children birth to 5 years. For instance, in your key points, after you've done your introduction, and you'll start unpacking it more. So you'll look at the 4 science areas, and then you're linking them to what concepts the children would develop through inclusion of science in the curriculum at your early learning centre. So you think about some age-appropriate activity examples and link these to curriculum and how they assist in the development of relevant science processing skills and attitudes. You're looking at the bigger picture also of how these skills and processes that are developed through the learning experiences pave the way for future learning. And so you're equipping children with essential skills, life skills that they can use in everyday life and throughout their learning and throughout primary school and into high school and into being adults. An activity example might be going on a bug hunt, and children are exploring their natural environment with a sense of curiosity and wonder. And at birth, this is just very informal, but they're developing these skills, and this would lead on to more sophisticated classifying of the items, and this sets them up well for primary school when they're starting to use appropriate language. So the next dot point is this one. You're including an explanation of the science categories, the 4 science categories: biology, chemistry, earth and space sciences, and physical sciences. Again, with examples of relevant conceptual understandings for children birth to 5 years. And this is the second dot point through all of these. It all links. So from week 4 on, by the way, week 3 really unpacks the science processing skills and attitudes. So have a good read of the week 3 module and click on all the materials in there. There's some really great stuff that'll help you with this assignment. Week 4 on looks at the science concepts. And so what we're asking you to do is include a brief explanation of the science content areas. So be careful you don't get bogged down in describing them for ages. A brief explanation, and we want you to then, flipping paper around, look at least 2 in more detail. Now, physical sciences isn't covered until week 7, so we don't expect you to include this in a great amount of detail, but we do expect you to acknowledge there are 4 science learning areas in the curriculum, and for the purposes of your report, you're going to look at least 2 in detail. So, for instance, you'll do a brief description of biological sciences, what this entails, how it looks in the curriculum document. And then you're going to think about a conceptual understanding that might be relevant for young children, birth to 5 years, and might be something as simple as living things have different needs or adapt to their surroundings. Then you would look at an activity that would further support that. and make some links. We don't expect you to include whole content descriptors from the Early Years Learning Framework or the Australian curriculum. So just the content descriptor code or a little bit of an elaboration on that. But we do need to see you linking it to the curriculum documents. So when you're thinking about the conceptual understanding, and that's moving children from their present knowledge to a broader concepts and deeper understanding. So you need to look at the Early Years Learning Framework and Australian curriculum documents, link your science category to activities that develop a relevant, age-relevant, and do be careful. I've seen students come up with way too sophisticated science concepts for little kids, a conceptual understanding for the children and what they'll gain as a result of participating in the activity that you use as an example. So what skills, processes, science dispositions, etc. So for instance, when investigating plants and growth, children will develop many skills such as observing and classifying, as well as discovering that living things have basic needs. This will lead to deeper appreciation of biology and pave the way for future learning. So make sure your discussion's linked to the Early Years Learning Framework and curriculum documents and referenced. Make sure you don't use too many direct quotes from these documents and paraphrase, synthesise where possible. You could also link the activity you're talking about to cross-curricular concepts too. So for instance, maths, art, English, and like counting and observing patterns, which is all connected to science very closely. So these will all be covered in the key points. Sorry, let's have a little look. I think it's a good way to do this is weaving things together and covering the first 1, 2, 3 points. So that's also demonstrating an understanding of how teaching approaches. That's how we apply our our professional choices. So what teaching approaches might be integrated, it might be hands-on learning activities, how we choose them and apply them to develop the science concepts appropriate to both the curriculum documents and the age group. So the first 3 dot points are the focus of your key points within the body of your report. We'll go into more detail in the report structure in the live Collaborate, but I've got a little brief outline here for you. So when you're writing your report, you have your executive summary. It's about 250 words. This is a quick overview or synopsis of the whole report, summarising the essential parts. So the purpose of the report, some of the examples you will be using and drawing on in the body. So it's not a lot of detail, about 250 words. It does include a brief overview of the conclusions, and we have examples in the Padlet, and there'll be more to come. Generally, you write your executive summary last after you've worked out what is actually in the body of your report. You'll need a contents page. That's only about 10 to 15 words. So you set it out like you might see in a book. And here's an example here. So, on page, they probably won't be all separate pages. You might have a couple of things on the same page. So on page 2, your executive summary. Page 3, table of contents. Page 4, introduction, key points on pages 5, conclusion and recommendations, and then references. Then you have your introduction. So you introduce the key aspects of your report. You need to include a rationale about the importance of science in early years education. And a good introduction is very important. It should give the reader all the information required to understand the importance and relevance of your topic. Clearly state the context and the purpose of your report. And then here is the important information. It's what everything, the introduction and your executive summary are drawn from this. You need to have this before you can really write the other stuff. So the key points will be about 1,250 words. Look at the points 1 to 3 outlined in the assessment criteria that I just went through briefly. And these were the ones to gain a credit. So demonstrate sound knowledge and understanding of the importance of teaching science content, processes and attitudes within the early years. You include a sound explanation of the 4 science categories. I would say in that many words, I would go into good detail about 2, but make sure you acknowledge the others. We need, within that, examples of relevant conceptual understandings for children aged birth to 5 years. And you also need to demonstrate a sound understanding of how teaching approaches are chosen to support the teaching of science concepts for that age group, with reference to the early years learning framework and Australian curriculum. Now remember, there are 2 more dot points, and I'll get to them in a minute. So these 3 points you can actually weave together. They can be combined. You could look at the science categories, write a definition, the application to science, and include an example of an activity that says 0 to 3, but it's actually 0 to 5-year-old child might do. That dot point 3 is where you display your understanding of the early years learning framework and the curriculum document. You link it to the learning outcomes and demonstrated elements of science that you're referring to. Make connections between the documents, the conceptual understanding, and broader reading. So there they are, the dot points I haven't got on here. You need to link this to academic reading. Our learning materials are fantastic. Please just be aware, Steve Spangler's science and things like that are not considered to be academic literature. We want peer-to-peer reviewed literature. This is what we have in our learning materials, in our essential readings. These are the best things that you can use to support your evidence. If you're referencing Swinburne materials, don't just reference Swinburne online. All of the information in our materials is in the reference list or referred to in the body of that weekly module. So please make sure you're not just getting things off some websites, and make sure they are scholarly literature that you're using to support your discussion. Then a conclusion, a concise summary of the key points, including your recommendations. Recommendations are an important element of reports, and they can be in dot form or numbered. For instance, the inclusion of science in the curriculum will and lead to. You can give a brief example of an activity to illustrate your recommendation and apply it back to the children's learning and development. Recommendations shouldn't introduce new ideas. They should align with the body of your report, the key points. So that equals 2,000 words plus or minus 10. Now I just want to look at the last 2 dot points here. You need to pay attention and make sure you have a clear general structure overall, which adheres to the report format. And we want to see your ability to apply the information and your understanding using relevant scholarly literature. And this does include course materials to support what you're writing. We do expect it to be proofread well, and you can see down here, careful editing and proofreading. Any errors in spelling, referencing and grammatical construction do not detract from the quality of the submission. So that is for a distinction. But we do expect your work at a university level to be proofread well, and that you have paid attention to the format. And you've also referenced as well as possible. All right. I think we're going to put lots of things in the Padlet. This is already half an hour that I've kept you. Please make sure you do look at the Padlet. The learning materials in this unit are absolutely fantastic. There are wonderful teaching ideas in there. These are the sorts of things we expect to see as examples in your report that you would draw on. Things, practical things. What would the children be doing? How are they developing science concepts? How is this linked to the curriculum documents? What fantastic science processing skills might they be developing in there, and what kinds of dispositions that are encouraged in the early years learning framework? So just absolutely applying all the wonderful things that science opportunities enable children to develop in your report. And yeah, good luck everybody. And I'll stop it now so I don't keep you for too long. Please come armed with questions to our live Collaborate. We're going to be on board, ready to ask you questions, and we will ask you questions, but for you to ask us questions. And when you start writing the report, you'll have lots of questions, and we are absolutely so happy to answer any of them and clarify anything. So hopefully I haven't confused you more than I should have. And yeah, we're here to help. So thank you for your time, and try to enjoy this assignment, and it'll really give you a lovely way to articulate the importance of science content for children birth to 5 years old and how this links with later education. Thank you very much.